Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to the Mom on the Verge podcast, where I aim to help you improve your sense of joy, purpose, and meaning in this life. We will talk about a lot of different ways we can do this, but ultimately, we'll be working toward finding our way back home to ourselves and remembering that even in the most challenging times, peace is only a breath away. I am your host, Katie Farinas, a mom, nurse, and yogi on a mission to improve mental health and build community in our world. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today, I have Stacey Uhrig back with us, and she has been on the show 2 other times. Once we were talking about burnout, and once we were talking about her specialty, developmental trauma. But today, we are talking about internal family systems, which is a therapeutic model that is really fascinating to me. And I think it's going to be fascinating to you too. And we are going to talk all about what it actually means, internal family systems, and how we can use it to get to know ourselves and return back to who we are, right? A lot of what this show is about, most of what this show is about, is helping you return home to yourself, helping you to get in touch with your higher self, with your soul, with that being of light that you are, that never dies, right? Just continues on. But when we come here to this planet Earth and we have this human experience, often that soul gets covered over. And this show is all about helping you peel back the layers and returning to your true self. And so that's a lot of what internal family systems is about. And as you'll hear in this episode, I actually didn't know that when I asked Stacey to talk on this subject. I had heard a couple other podcasts related to this topic. It kind of fascinated me. I wanted to know more about it. And so I knew Stacey was trained in parts work and asked her if she would come on and speak about it. But as she spoke about it, it was striking to me how similar it is to Vedic philosophy and to all the things that I so deeply believe in. And so that was really just fun to see the overlap there and how that wisdom has informed this therapeutic model. So you're going to really love this conversation. Before I move on to the conversation, I just want to remind you that I have the new coaching program where I combine the coaching with the private yoga lessons, really getting at a mind-body approach and helping you return back to your soul, remove those layers, and understand what your soul's purpose is and why you are here and what you are meant to be doing while you're here. Because really, I'm trying to get you back to the magic of life. If life has been feeling a little bit flat, or you've been a little down or anxious, or just feeling lost or stuck, this is where the magic comes in. It's returning to yourself and really, truly stepping into the fullness of who you are, and doing the thing that you were uniquely designed to do here in this lifetime. And I really believe in this mind-body approach because our bodies are wise and they speak to us. And a lot of information comes from just settling into the body and listening, getting quiet and still and listening to the body. So my normal coaching program, of course, is always available if the yoga does not speak to you. But if it does, that I think it's a really great approach to doing this work. And I don't mention it enough on the podcast, but I also have a Voxer version. So I know you all are very busy. Many of you out there have children, you're working jobs, your schedules are crazy. And sometimes it's hard to commit to a 12-week long program where we meet once a week for an hour. And so I created a couple of other options to make it more flexible. One is this Voxer option. So Voxer is a walkie-talkie app. And if you download the app, which is free, what happens is you and I meet for one 60-minute session where we really clarify your goals and your intentions and talk about, what you want to work on, where you're really feeling stuck, whether it be in home or work or just kind of life in general. And then we communicate the rest of the time through Voxer. So you just send me questions whenever you have them, and I answer your questions, and we communicate back and forth like that. And it's a month-to-month basis. So it's $200 for the first month and then $100 for each month after that. And you have access to me all month long whenever you need me. So that is also an option. And then the last thing that I am making available is a coaching program where you don't have to sign up for the whole 3 months. You can sign up for one session at a time. I love the 3-month program. I think transformation comes more quickly and more easily when we commit to working on something very regularly over a period of time. But I also am a mom with a job, and I totally get that your life is full and busy, and that, that just may not be feasible for you at this particular juncture in your life. And so I don't want that to prevent you from taking steps towards moving towards your most authentic self, to moving towards a life that feels impactful and purposeful and magical and meaningful, and a life that feels like you. So I want to make all of the options available so that anyone who's interested in doing this work, they don't feel a barrier to doing the work. So if any of that sounds like it would fit into your life and something that would really help you live your most authentic life, then please, please reach out to me. You can always contact me through email. You can book a discovery call on my website, or contact me on Instagram, and all those links are in the show notes. Okay, everyone, I hope you enjoy this. At the end of this episode, Stacey said that this parts work is really beautifully represented in the movie Inside Out 2. So I'm sure many of you have already seen that movie, but if you haven't, this conversation will give you the framework to watch that movie and really understand how this internal family systems model works in a really fun and engaging way. So if you haven't seen the movie, go see it. If you've already seen it, maybe you can reflect on the movie as you're listening to this conversation, and it can help you really understand even better this internal family systems. All right, have a great listen, everyone. All right, Stacey, welcome back to the show. I'm actually not going to say welcome back to Mom on the Verge, because by the time listeners hear this, the show might have a different name. So we're just going to say welcome back to the show. We're doing a little rebranding on this end. I am so excited to have you back. I love every conversation we ever have, whether it's recorded or not. And I love hearing your expertise on these topics. And today we're talking about internal family systems, which is something I had not heard about until maybe 2 years ago or so, on a different podcast. And I thought they were talking about, so if anyone's heard the term internal family systems, I thought they were talking about between family members, right? What goes on between family members. But then I learned that's really not true at all. It's about what goes on inside of us between the different parts of ourselves. So can you give us like a good explanation of what internal family systems is, much better than I
Sure.
can?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
let me start by just giving you like a brief history that I'm aware of, that I've heard directly from Dick Schwartz, who's the person that developed internal family systems. So internal family systems is an over 40-year-old therapeutic model that was developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz, who is a therapist. And it really came out of his own work when he was in the beginning stages of his practice and starting to recognize that people are not singular, that people are what he calls multimodal. And he learned this by happen chance, really. Like he was working with different clients in eating disorder clinics and was starting to recognize when people would utilize language like, well, there's a part of me that wants to do this, but then there's a part of me that wants to do that. And we all use that language. And I think he got really attuned to how frequently he was hearing that and got very, very curious about this very concept of are we made up of multiple parts?
Yeah.
And so, without getting into great detail, over 40 years ago, he started doing some very evidence-based research on this and developed this model known as internal family systems. And as you mentioned, people who hear about it at the beginning think, oh, this is about working with external dynamics, family dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Internal family systems really references the fact that at some point in our lives, which I'll talk about in a second, we develop different parts of ourselves in survival. And these parts exist as your internal family, right? Like as your internal support system. And in many cases, these parts of us are like the closest thing to like our ride or die, the most loyal, the most fiercely protective entity in our life, but we're not really aware of it. So the way I like to describe it is, and I should preface a few things. Number one, I am not trained by the Internal Family Systems Institute. Initially, the lottery to get in and to get trained in the Internal Family Systems Institute, it's a lottery process. There's tens of thousands of people in the lottery.
Wow.
And I know many people who have gotten in, and there are different levels of training. And so the people I've been trained by in what's known as, my certification is known as parts work through a polyvagal lens. Those people are level 2 and level 3 trained IFS practitioners. Okay. So I am not trained by IFS Institute, which means I cannot say that I practice internal family systems, but the types of parts work that I do is internal family systems based, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Just throwing it out there. Yes. I want to be fully transparent here. The way that I see it, and the way that it's made the most sense to people when I describe it, is in the concept of internal family systems, there's something known as self-energy. And self-energy is this core essence of yourself that you're born with. So the way I love to describe it is, you have a child, right? We've talked about our kids before offline. When our children are born, there's nothing they need to do in order for us to absolutely love them with every ounce of our being. Just for existing. All they are doing is being alive, being centered, being grounded. And that's enough. There are certain qualities when we are being self-led, or when we're in this self-energy and we're grounded in the self-energy, that lead us to know that we are being self-led. It's not a conscious thing, okay? These are innate qualities of self. We're confident, we're courageous, we're curious, we're creative. We believe that we're worth being connected with, and that we desire connection. We're hardwired for connection. This leads to a sense of calm in our nervous system, and that's just 6 of a number of qualities that is innate when somebody's self-led. As adults, when we find ourselves in that zone, we use language like, I feel so aligned with myself, or I'm in alignment, or I'm in flow, or I feel so connected to myself. When we don't have those qualities present, we say things like, I don't recognize myself, or I don't even know who I am, or I feel so disconnected from myself. We're all born with that self-energy. Over a period of time, it could be hours, days, weeks, months, years, whatever it is, we begin to either experience or observe in our environment threats or things that lead us to believe that our needs cannot be met. Okay, so going back to that self-energy when we're first born, your child's in self-energy when they need a diaper changed at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they have the confidence and the clarity, the confidence in I need to express that I need help, the clarity in I need help, the worthiness and that connectedness of I deserve for my diaper to be changed. And they are courageous in using their voice. There's no part of an infant. It's like, oh my God, it's probably in the middle of the night. My parents are sleeping. I don't want to be a burden. I'll just
Right.
wait and deprioritize my needs. No, my needs are number one priority, and I deserve to have them met.
Mhm.
Same with being fed. Same
Mhm.
with being cleaned. They're very clear on that. When they're old enough to sit in a high chair and you give them a Cheerio and they don't want it, they will spit it out. They will throw it on the floor. There's no part of them that's like, oh, I shouldn't do that, because they know what they want and they know what they don't want. And it's very,
Yeah.
very clear. When they're trying to crawl, they're going to fall on their face. An infant does not have this negative inner critic when they fall on their face to say things like, oh my God, I'm such a loser. I can't even crawl right.
Right.
No, they just stop. They have the confidence to start again.
Mhm.
So everyone has this innately in them. Over time, like I mentioned, those days, weeks, months, years, when we observe our environment or we experience in our environment that core needs are not going to be met, physiological needs, food, water, air, movement, exercise, another level of needs is safety and security, another level of needs is loving and belonging.
Mhm.
If there's a threat to any of that, the language I use is we shapeshift. We shed a piece of that core authentic self
Mhm.
and fragment into a part to meet the need of our caretaker so that need will be met.
Yeah.
And if that works, it sticks. It's like cause and effect.
Mhm.
So if I learn that by being the good daughter or the good son, by being quiet or being demure or being a
Mhm.
people pleaser in some way, shape, or form gets that need met, I'll continue that. If I
Mhm.
learn that only being bold and loud and audacious is the way to get my need met, I'm going to roll with that.
Mhm.
So we start to shapeshift. Some people call it a personality. In this place, we'd call it a part, where a part of ourselves develops. And then over time, we may become more part led than self led.
Mm.
And by
Okay.
the way, you could develop dozens of parts, right? Because
Mhm.
you're starting to recognize, oh, when I show up like this, I feel, and the feeling is the key piece, connected, seen, loved, heard, enough, important.
Mhm.
So you might have a role or a part that shows up that's different with one sibling than the other, or with one parent than the other. Or maybe
Mhm.
there's different parts of you that show up at home that are different from when you're around your friends, or when you're in school, or when you're on the bus, or when you're at gymnastics, or whatever an activity is that you're at.
Mhm.
But in my personal point of view, and this is not necessarily an IFS thing, in my personal point of view, you're constantly kind of surveying for those needs. Am I going to have my basic needs met?
Yeah.
Do I feel safe and secure in this environment? And do I feel like I belong, which is very different than fitting in?
Mhm.
Belonging is I can show up just as me, fully self led, totally enough.
Mhm.
Fitting in is there's a piece of me that doesn't fit in this puzzle. So I'm going to shapeshift just a little bit. So I'll be accepted and I will be connected with.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like we can launch off of that pad, but like that's
Yeah.
kind of like a very big overview from my seat, like the way that I like to describe how these parts develop in ourselves.
Yeah.
What questions do you have about that? Because I can go in like a lot of different directions.
Yeah. So, well, first, I just want to say it's really fascinating because like I said, I know a little bit about this through a couple of different podcasts that I have listened to. And is the man who developed it still alive? Because I'm pretty sure I listened to a podcast where he was on it, but
Oh
not
yeah, no, he's
okay.
like probably in his late 60s. I mean,
Okay.
he did this when he was in his 20s. He was
He
at the
did.
beginning of
Okay.
his practice.
Yeah, I'm pretty
So,
sure. And I will say that I think you just did a better job of explaining what it is than he did because it makes more sense to me what you said than what he said. And I don't know if that's because what you're explaining to me, actually, as my listeners know, I am in the Vedic philosophy, right? That's what I study, that's what I coach on, that's what I swim in on a daily basis. And that is really what it's all about. It's we come into this world with an energy, which we call
yeah,
prana. And we know that we are worthy and we are loved and we are perfect
right,
exactly as we are. And that the things that occur in our lives then place these layers on top of that soul, on top of that prana, that change the way, at least from the ego mind, the way that we see ourselves and the
right.
whole journey of life, right? From a Vedic philosophy viewpoint, is to travel back to the center. It's to clear the looking glass, remove those layers,
Right.
and come back to a place of wholeness, authenticity, and internal knowing that we are perfect exactly as we are, and that we should do everything from this space that is guided with this connection to the higher self.
100%. And that's what I kind of love about this. Like, Dick really did take a lot of time to research a lot of other philosophies that are integrated in. And I know he's definitely worked with a lot of Eastern philosophy and shamanic. I mean, he's gone all
Yes.
over to try to see, because there is a commonality in all of it, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
everyone's coming to it. It's the same thing. It's just different flavor of gelato. Like, it is the
Yes.
same concept. And when
Right.
I work with clients, what we do is we start to recognize different parts that are present. And then, more importantly, of when did this part enter your system? Like, what was
Mm,
going on in your life when this part basically formed in your
yeah.
benefit? And
Mhm.
that's where the healing starts, because we get to, when these parts develop, we're likely not as resourced as we are
Right. As an
in
adult.
adulthood. And so when I
Mhm.
when I say that, just for the listener's point of view, because I use that language all the time, what that really means is, if you think about it, let's just say hypothetically you witnessed uh domestic violence in your home, and there's really no safe way for you to fight the person,
Mhm.
and there's no way for you to flee because you're only 8 years old and you can't really
Right.
run away, and you don't have
Mhm.
access to a car, and maybe
Yeah.
there's nowhere to go. And so now you're kind of stuck with two innate coping strategies, because we have four: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn,
Mhm.
right? These are adaptations, they're human adaptations to stress.
Mhm.
It's our survival. So now we've got two left. We've got this freeze adaptation, which is, I'm present, but I've literally just left my body,
Mhm.
mind, body, and spirit. I'm here, but I'm frozen. I'm paralyzed, and I'm going to try to actually like melt into the shadows so no
Yeah.
one sees me.
Mhm.
Is that safe? Or I'm going to fawn. And fawn is that appease and please. So it's, what do
Mhm.
I need to do to make sure you're comfortable, to make sure you're happy, to make sure your needs are met, so this will
Yeah.
stop,
Right. Yeah.
right? So our parts are kind of all based in these concepts. And the reality is if we witness something that as a young child, and I'm just using this as one example, we're flooded with a sense of emotion:
Mm.
fear, shame, abandonment, betrayal, rejection. There's so many things that can happen in a moment.
Yeah.
And those feelings could be incredibly overwhelming for a young nervous system. And we likely don't have the language to be even able to express that emotion. And so, because it's so overwhelming to the nervous system, the part will say, "Don't worry, I've got you." And the concept is never again. Like, that's the mantra of the part: never again. I'm never going to let Katie feel that again.
Mhm.
So, what do
Mhm.
and by the way, that's a wound that gets
Yeah.
created on I say, inside your heart center or your soul,
Mhm.
right? It could be as small as a paper cut.
Mm-hmm.
But we know a little bit of lemon or a little bit of salt in a paper cut hurts a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost so small, it's invisible, but it's
Yeah.
very present. And the part's job is to kind of create some sort of boundary around this wound so it doesn't get touched.
Yeah.
What I always say is when people talk about triggers, what they're really saying is something happened where the part didn't do its job and that wound got touched.
Mm.
So maybe there was no people pleasing on the face of the earth that would appease this person. The wound's been touched.
Yeah.
Maybe by freezing and disconnecting and being paralyzed and disassociating wasn't going to work, and that wound gets touched.
Yeah.
Maybe that inner critic didn't stop me enough from whatever it was that I would do. Wound got touched. There's so many different things, caretakers. There's so many different kinds of these manager parts that we develop.
Yeah.
Perfectionism, people pleasing, no boundary setting, validation seeking parts, lack of confrontation parts, lack of confidence parts. There's so many different. Those are known as managers. They're proactive. Their goal is to not have that wound touched. In the world of IFS, those wounds are called exiles because they're almost like emotions that have been ostracized, not dealt with. There's another type of part, and it's called a firefighter. And in the realm of internal family systems, a firefighter comes up when a manager hasn't done its job.
So the manager's like the prevention
It's
is
the
what I'm
prevention.
understanding. I'm going to
They're
prevent this wound
proactive.
from, yes, being
That's
touched.
right.
So you're going to enter an environment with one of these managers based on what you're sensing around you.
Right. Let's just say you're walking into a job interview or something where maybe you're like going to be nervous, or maybe there's going to be some anxiousness associated with that. And so you're going to basically show up. People say all the time, I have imposter syndrome. They're basically saying, like, I'm not being self-led. Like, I'm showing up, playing this role in this part. I want to look perfect. I want to say the right things. You've got all these managers that are lined up to boom, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's just say it doesn't go well, or maybe it does go well. You don't know. But in that process, this deep emotion comes up that you really just don't know how to handle because you never learned how to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
Now this other part will come in. It's known as a fight or fighter. They're reactive. They're like, oh, you didn't do your job, manager. And now she's flooded.
Mm-hmm.
And we call it anxiety or a shame storm or depression, but she's flooded with this cacophony of emotions and she doesn't know how to handle it. So I'm going to distract and soothe her.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So any kind of addiction, OCD, substance use, Netflix binging, scrolling and trolling. Like, we could come up with a lot of things that we all know we do. For me, sometimes a firefighter is quote unquote productive. It's to go for a run or to go for a walk or to go to the gym. But really what we're doing is trying to distract and soothe and not manage and deal with the emotion, right?
So then what's the difference between a firefighter and a healthy coping mechanism when we are flooded with emotions? And we might say, I want to try to get that out. So I'm going to go for a run or do something that would be considered more healthy than maybe binge eating or using a substance or something like that.
So I'm going to reference again, I'm not IFS trained. Like, I'm not trained by the IFS Institute. So some of the things that I might say, they might say like, that's not our philosophy or whatever. So, as a practitioner, because I am trained in parts work and because I have worked with so many clients, and you kind of learn how humans work just by being in the field, right? Whether or not this is like quote unquote strict IFS language or not, I just want to preference that. But to answer your question, I think all firefighters begin adaptive, meaning they're all doing something to help. It's all working in your favor. even when you sip a glass of wine or you take a shot of booze or you're doing something, it's really working in your benefit. I'm trying to help her here. The thing is that sometimes these reactive measures become maladaptive, right? Where they're no longer hindering or helping your life, they're now hindering your life.
Yeah.
So is it a hindrance to go to the gym every day or to go for a run? I don't know. Are you being excessive about it? Are you utilizing it as a tool to run away from and not deal with? Right?
Yeah.
We talk about people who are workaholics or are like, type A and never stop and never quit. And a lot of times people will say, I just get so much pleasure from work. And that's probably true. But at the same time, is it hindering your life in some way? Is it distracting you from having deep relationships with people? Right? Is it creating some sort of chaos that's, impacting your life in a negative way? So, we often say in my space that all coping strategies are adaptive until many of them become maladaptive. And that's when you can really stop and say, okay, I'm stuck because this isn't working for me anymore. And all protective parts basically are that. They begin adaptive until they become maladaptive. They become a helper until they become a hinder.
But always the intention is to help you, to protect you, to feel better.
Always.
Always. But then
actually,
they can take a right-hand turn there in a different direction.
No doubt. And one of the books that Dick Schwartz wrote is called No Bad Parts. And the idea is all parts are benevolent. All parts are good. They all have good intentions. Even the ones that are destroying our life have good intentions, because here's the kicker. And I don't know if this is the same in the type of philosophy that you coach from, but in the realm of parts work, part of the conceptualism around it is that when a part is developed, okay, so, or we can say when your self gets fragmented, it stays the age that you were when it entered your system. And it believes that you are that age. It never really understands that you age.
Okay.
So it's still protecting you, as though we'll go back to that original example of being 8 and witnessing a domestic violence situation. It still believes you're 8, even if you're 58.
Right.
It still believes you still have access to the same resources as you were 8. So it really does believe it's helping you.
Yeah.
When I utilize my hypnotherapy model, which is known as rapid transformational therapy, when I use that with clients as a tool, and I'm able to address the parts at the subconscious level, I'm giving them a voice to try to explain why they are in this person's nervous system, right? Why did they show up? Why did they develop? What is their role? What is their function? What's their purpose? And more importantly, what is their intention? And we go through this very specific dialogue to give access to the part to be able to speak at the subconscious level. But always at one point, I will ask the client to then ask the client's part, how old was the client when the part showed up? Very often I hear 3, 5, 8, 9, 10, 12. And then I'll ask the client to tell the part how old he or she really is, which is usually 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 something.
Right.
And what's so interesting is because I witness so many of these sessions, but for them, it's like their first. I always hear the same things. So if the client says, this part says that it came into my system when it was 8 years old, and I'm telling the part that I'm 58, and I'll say, how does that feel in your system? And they always say the same thing: a little shocked, a little surprised, a little relieved.
It's like this, oh, okay, we maybe don't have to protect her so fiercely because she is resourced now.
And so there's a couple of things that happen. There's a burden that the part feels. And the burden is what I'll call is a deep, loyal sense of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've been in practice for 50 years, you're tired.
Mm-hmm.
And so that relief comes from like, I feel so burdened with this. So part of it's very specific IFS language is we're trying to help the part unburden.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sometimes a part feels sad or a little concerned because now it's afraid it's going to get kicked to the curb. It's really interesting the way these parts work. So think about this internal piece of you that's like your internal family. It's like your BFF. And they're like, well, if you're 50, like, what's my role going to be then? Like, and now maybe they get like a little extra activated in the system because now they're starting to panic.
Right.
So, a lot of what happens in that moment is we start to kind of dialogue and negotiate with that part. How does it think it's helping my client? You kind of can see it's really not. But there's also this sense in the part, but nobody knows her better than I do. Nobody knows him better than I do. Like I actually know better than even him or her how this is going to go down. So a lot of times we're spending time creating productive dialogue between the self and the part until the part feels like it can support my client's self energy in a more appropriate way.
So if we go back to the Eastern philosophy, this reminds me of what we call ego. And, ego, at least my understanding of it prior to knowing all I know now, was that more like bravado, more like, oh, I'm so wonderful, I'm better than everybody else, that kind of thing. But what really ego is your body's and mind and soul's way of trying to protect you, right? It is your protector. Your ego is your protector. But in doing so, it separates you from your true self.
It's so similar, yeah.
It's so similar. And in these Eastern traditions, there's a heavy emphasis on meditation and introspection. And the reason why that is because whenever we enter a state of meditation, we get to become the witness. We become the witness of our thoughts, right? And that's who we really are. We're not our thoughts. We're the witness of our thoughts. But once you start meditating for a significant period of time, life starts to become a meditation. And so you can start to become the witness, not just in meditation, but moving through your everyday life. Right. In every interaction you have, in all the thoughts that you're thinking, in everything that's coming out of your mouth, in every behavior that you exhibit, you start to be able to become the witness. So that creates some separation between the ego or those parts of you that are trying to protect you, right, and your true self. Right. And you're now almost witnessing those parts as if you were watching them on a movie screen. And you're like, oh, look at me. Look at what I'm doing. Look at what I'm saying. And it becomes clear as to why you're doing the things you're doing or saying the things that you're saying. It's all very similar. I had no idea when we started this conversation.
So in my practice, I call that being in the seat of the observer, right? Yeah. You're taking the observer role. And, to your point about the space and the separation, often when I can feel in a session that a client is very present because I'm listening to the dialogue of my client, I'll ask them if we can take a moment and get quiet. And so usually, like in a meditation, I'll ask them to close their eyes. I ask them to get settled. And I ask them to get attuned to any sensation in and around the body. And in IFS, this is really what we call, we're detecting, like, how can we detect that this part is present? And usually it happens, like clients will be like, oh, I feel like a pinch in my neck, or I feel a heaviness on my shoulders, or I feel it in my throat, or I feel it in my, like, you're starting to get quiet and recognize like there is actually some vibration, some sort of activation that's happening in my body, right? Because we're so kind of blind to it and like numb to it because it's 24/7. Once they can tell me where they feel that in and around their body, I ask them to get a little bit more detailed. Okay, like, do you feel that it could be represented by a color or a shape or a weight or a size? And they roll with, oh, it feels like a ball and chain, or it could feel like green slime, or it feels like a hot fire. Like they start to understand, they're starting to recognize. And then what I will then do, and this is actually not the way I was trained, it's just innately what I've learned through all my practice, is to then identify the self energy. Okay, so we recognize that this part is present, but I'd also like to invite into this the self energy. Now, very often that self energy is very small compared to the part. So that's fine. But I want them to imagine or feel or get in touch with where it might be, even if it's a whisper. And then I ask them to see if they can see a separation between these energies in their system. Do these parts recognize each other? Are they acknowledging that the other ones are present? So in my way of doing that, what I'm really trying to do is get them to see this is not you. This is a part of you.
Yeah.
Because when in IFS, the term would be blended. When they're blended, you feel like it's all of you.
Yeah.
So what I'm really trying to do is create space, create some distinction so they can see and feel in their system, okay, this is just a part of me. This is not all of me. In that moment, usually there's this sense of like, okay, I can control myself. Like sometimes people feel like I don't even have control of me. Right. And it's not like we're looking to control the part. It just gives them a sense of agency of there's hope here.
Yes.
Because I can now sense that there's a differentiator between me and this part. And now we can give the part a voice. So I might say to my client, after we've been able to distinguish the space, I might have them say something. I'll use your name, for example. And let's just say we're working on a lack of confidence. Okay. And this lack of confidence part's really big. I might say, repeat after me. I'm the part of Katie that is the lack of confidence. And this person will say this out loud after me. So I'm the part of Katie that is the lack of confidence. And my only role in Katie's life is, and then I say, just fill in that blank. And it just flows out. I've never had a client where they're like, there's nothing. There's always something.
Yeah.
Because I'm really teaching you to get intuitive and clear and in touch with you and your part.
Yeah.
And often when we do this, I have you do the same thing. What's my function? What's my purpose? What's my intention? And the answer is always relatively similar. To keep her small, to keep her safe, to protect her, to keep her hidden, to do whatever it is, to get her attention, right? It usually is one of three roles. It's either to protect, prioritize, or get some sort of, it's sometimes a punishment, but very, 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 very rarely, because they're really benevolent parts. So after we've done that practice like 3 or 4 times, the dialogue changes because sometimes the part recognizes while we're going through this dialogue, I'm starting to recognize I'm not helping.
Yeah, right.
I'm starting to recognize this isn't working.
Yeah.
And now we can have this dialogue. And I can say, okay, Katie, from your self energy seat, from the seat of your soul, from the seat of that being self-led, what would you like to say to this part? And what's so beautiful, and again, my clients don't know that like what they say is like so global, but they all kind of just lead with thank you.
Yeah.
Like, I totally get it now. And so now they don't hate this part of themselves. They have compassion and gratitude towards this part. Think of how many people say, I hate that part of myself.
Yeah. I know. Well, as you were speaking, you just used the word compassion, but I was thinking this is self-compassion work. It's another way of getting at self-compassion.
And this is my approach. Again, it's loosely based on that IFS concept, right? But it's all parts work led. And now at the end, the clients can be like, I don't really hate me and I don't really hate this part. Like, I get it. Like, it makes sense. And like, now I love this part of myself. Like, I don't think I could have survived without this part. And now the part feels valued and seen and important. And now we're not having an inner conflict anymore. Now the part's like, wow, you do really see me. Like, you do understand my value. And now they're thankful, your self energy is thankful, and you can create this communion, if you will, between the parts. And now, of course, we're trying to do this with as many parts as we can because we're all made up of so many parts. But that's generally the concept of sometimes we have this inner conflict with ourselves, right? With the different parts of ourselves. And this work really is designed to diffuse the conflict and really create that compassion and that understanding.
That's amazing. I have three things for you. One is it's really interesting that you talked about going to the body because even when you were giving the example in the beginning, like when you're a baby and we don't think about it 2 a.m, like we just say we have needs and we express them and we feel completely in our worthy of doing that. When I'm working with my clients, I often tell them, go to your body because we work on purpose and in trying to understand, why we're here and what we're really meant to be doing, getting in touch with that soul. And I always say your body doesn't lie, right? Your brain lies all day, every day, but the body is so wise. And so it doesn't seem to be impacted in the same way as our thoughts are when we have these experiences. Our body can still kind of distinguish what is right for us or what's really truly in our soul energy and what is not in our soul energy. So it's a beautiful way of like connecting to that. So I love that you do that.
Yeah.
But my other question, well, two, I guess, questions. One is the goal in IFS or in parts work to say goodbye to the parts, to like validate them and, say thank you for your service, but I am a resourced adult now and I no longer need you? Or is it to just be able to recognize them when they arrive, kind of like give them a pat on the head and say thank you, and then proceed without them? Because, if we're really trying to get back to our soul energy, our parts were there to protect us, but if we're living truly in alignment with our soul's energy, do we still really need those parts?
A fantastic question. So my short answer is the goal is to create harmony with all the parts. That's my intention, is to help my clients create harmony within their nervous system, create harmony within their parts, within themselves. So we need all of our parts. All of our parts have value. But the thing is that sometimes they're like overworking when they don't need to be present. So say you have a fear-based part, right? A lot of people walk around with a lot of fear about everything. Well, that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to be fearful of everything all the time. So that part at that time might be overactive. However, there might be a time in your life where fear would be completely appropriate. Like if you were to get into a car accident, or if you were being followed by somebody or something, you need that fear piece to get activated so your body can activate in a way that is necessary. So we do not want to ever get rid of any parts. What we're asking them to do is take the more appropriate role, the more appropriate level within your system. So an analogy that I've come up with over the years that I actually love, and when I share it with my clients, they're like, holy shit, that's so smart.
I love a good analogy. I can't wait.
It's so good. I was like, okay, here it goes. Have you ever been to a symphony or an orchestra or a band concert or anything like that?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
If you get there early, before it has started, and you're sitting in your seat, what do you hear when they're practicing?
Yeah, you hear them. Well, I think they're tuning. That's what I think they're doing.
That's what I call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how does it sound when all of them are tuning at the same time?
Not so good.
Not so good. Right. So it sounds like organized chaos.
Yeah.
Right. And it's almost like each one's trying to tune louder than the next. So you've got the winds, you've got the percussions, you've got the horns, you've got the reeds, it sounds literally like a war of the instruments. But the moment the conductor comes out and stands up and taps his baton, the whole thing just settles down, and each section knows its role. And each section knows the appropriate amount to come in and the appropriate amount to go out, and when to get bigger and louder, and when to get softer and quieter. And when they're getting softer and quieter, so another part can come in and out. So I like to use the analogy of, imagine that your parts are like the pieces of a symphony. We can't have the piece. The piece is not going to be the best without all the parts. The conductor represents us being self-led. When we're being led by the parts, the piece doesn't work. If the wind instrument thinks its job is to be the loudest and boldest in the piece and everybody else should stand back, it's not going to work. When we can become the conductor of our nervous system, and we can say, I need more of you, anxiety. I need to have some anxiety right now. It's going to help me prepare for that test, but I just need a little bit of it. I just need a little bit of that cortisol. I need a little bit of that fear. I also need a little bit of that people pleasing just in this moment, because I know it's going to work for me. I'm not doing it in survival. I'm doing it more of a tactical, logistical, right? I'm going to decide when I'm going to pull this in and out. I'm trying to get something accomplished here. So I might have to pull out a little bit of an anger card, right? So we never want to get rid of our parts. All parts are valid and valuable. What we're trying to do is create that symphony, that balance, that harmony in our system, so we can be more self-led. All right. Another example I give sometimes, especially if I'm working with guys, but I can't distinguish. A lot of people love basketball, but if I'm working with a male client, a lot of times I'll use this analogy. Or imagine you have a basketball team, and if you have a good basketball team, you probably have a total of like maybe 15 players max. That gives you your starting five, and that gives you a second string of five, and then a third string of five if you really need it. Okay. So maybe your first five, they're the ones that have been running point, but they're kind of not really appropriate at this point in the game. So we're not asking them to leave. We're just asking them to sit at the end of the bench. So if we need to call them up, we'll call them up. But we want the team to be out in the court being led by the coach, which is being self-led, versus being led by the players on the bench. Or it's having one player that thinks he knows the best in the whole team, and he's kind of going rogue. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So that's how I see it. So in order to answer your question, I don't believe that the goal is to ever get rid of a part. The goal is to unburden the part from this heavy responsibility and loyalty it's been feeling for you. For is the distinguishing term. And really create that harmony so we are more self-led and less parts-led. There's a respect within the system that you actually know yourself best. So for me personally, obviously, I know this work. I coach on this work. I train on this work. I talk about this work. If I can feel a part very present, that is an old part. And I know exactly why it's present. Now I can quickly detect, because I've learned, I call it like nuanced ringtones in my system of different parts. I can detect what part is present. I can ask that part, what are you doing here? Like, why are you coming up? What do you think is going on that you need to be activated? And I'm so attuned with myself now. We hear our inner voices, right? So I can listen and then I can dialogue. Yeah, I get that. I totally see how in the past this is why you would come up for me. And I'm not speaking this out loud, it's an internal dialogue. But here's what I know to be true now. And here's what I feel like I can do about it. And you know what? I might need you to activate, but right now, not so much. What I say to this particular part in my head is, I'm just going to ask you to go find that lazy boy chair and go take a beat. I promise you, I will call on you if I need you. I have deep respect for everything you've brought to the table up to this point. I would love to be able to show you that I can actually do this from my self energy. Please, like, and I feel that, like, okay, cool. And it's just like, do. And I can feel it. You feel it in your nervous system. All those nerves and muscles in and around your nerves start to soften.
Yeah. That's interesting because I'm glad you said that, because what I was thinking was, yes, sometimes we do need fear and sometimes we do need anxiety, but like, for example, people pleasing. When are we denying our true self by engaging, by allowing that part to be present? But I guess if you have enough distance between your true self and the part, and you can see when it shows up, and then you can decide, the use of this part in this moment of my benefit, or is it not? And then decide how you want to engage with the part. That's very different than the part kind of just showing up and taking over.
I'll give a perfect example. So I work with a lot of women that have been through narcissistic abuse. And they will come to me in different stages. Sometimes they come to me and they know that their marriage is dysfunctional and toxic, or the relationship is dysfunctional and toxic. And it doesn't even have to be a spousal relationship. It could be a work relationship or a family relationship. And they're starting to see the light, and they're starting to put language to what it is that they're experiencing. And they're in a decision-making mode. What am I going to do with this information? Am I going to stay in this? Am I not going to stay in this? Can I reframe it? Is it possible to reframe it? Am I disengaging from this? Like, what am I doing? And sometimes I'm coaching them through that process. Sometimes if they're in a marriage, they've realized there's no reframing to be done, and they're in mediation, or they're in some sort of legal battle, or I'm dealing with them after the dissolution, but there still needs to be a connection, maybe because there's kids involved or whatever. If I'm working with somebody that's going through mediation, they know their true authentic self, but that may not be the right thing to show up at a mediation table. Right? Sometimes we cannot express our true feelings because we're trying to negotiate a deal. We might be really hurt and really angry and really sad. And there are a lot of things that we have the right to say, but that's not the right form for it.
Yeah.
So then you do have to kind of engage with that part of you that's like, I need you to come in for me to keep me calm and cool. I need to put on that face. I need to yes to death in a particular piece of this process. And then when I don't need to yes to death in this process, I can harness this other piece of myself, or I can show up more self-led. But sometimes we need to come in and be like, okay. And I say to my clients, let's have a company-wide meeting. Call a family meeting. Who can show up? Who can show up in support of me from the moment I get out of the car to the moment this is over? How can this people pleasing part turn into my inner cheerleader? How come this part turn into this for me? And so sometimes being self-led isn't always, I don't know. This maybe if somebody were listening to this from the IFS Institute, they'd be like, wrong. But the reality is, this is more reality.
Right.
Right.
Well, that was one of my questions, because we do all live in a world where sometimes showing up as our true self is not to our benefit.
That's
And
right. It's not going to get us the outcome that we're seeking.
Right. So, but how do we not deny ourselves? How do we not,
Again, I say call that company-wide meeting of the internal parts and be like, here's the game, guys. We're in a game.
Yeah.
We're in a game. And that's usually what it is when you're in the legal system. It's a game.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be as self-led as I can be, but I'm going to be pulling on you guys. I can't go in 100% self-led.
Right.
How do we do this? And there's a lot of empowerment with that, because now we're really harnessing all of the greatest parts of us that we have.
Yeah. I love that. Really, really good. I want to keep us on time because I know you have something at 12 and it's 11:58. So, thank you so much for being here. I could continue this conversation because I find this so fascinating, but I will put all your stuff in the show notes. And that way, if anyone's interested in doing this work, they can contact you. And you had mentioned a few books you were going to reference and we never got to it. So I can put those in the show notes.
The book is called No Bad Parts.
Okay,
that's by Dr. Richard Schwartz, Dick Schwartz. He's the developer of internal family systems. Another book I have here is just called Internal Family Systems Therapy, second edition, also by Richard Schwartz and also Martha Sweezy, who's amazing. And then this book, for anybody that really deals with shame and guilt, this is a real textbook book. Okay. It's real technical in a lot of ways, but it also shows a lot of therapy in it. So there's a lot of therapeutic dialogue. This is by Martha Sweezy, and the forward is also by Dr. Richard Schwartz, and it's called Internal Family Systems for Shame and Guilt.
Okay.
I have another one that's just for addiction. I truly believe that this is the way that all therapists should be trained. I feel that this is an incredibly trauma-focused and trauma-informed therapeutic model. I'm very, very grateful that I have access to this content and this information and this knowledge and this know-how. And if someone is listening and this speaks to them, if you want to work with an IFS therapist, someone who's truly trained by an IFS, you can go to the Internal Family Systems Institute. They have a directory of people who completed their coursework, or you can go to Psychology Today. And you can use internal family systems or IFS as like something that you're looking for. Or if you don't want to work with a therapist and you want to work with a coach, you can look for somebody that's either trained in IFS or somebody that's trained in parts work.
Okay. That's awesome. I think that's wonderful. I think this is, I agree with you. I mean, this is a foundation really we should all be starting with when we're entering into therapy. Because it truly helps to get to know we get to know ourselves through this process, all of ourselves, all the parts of ourselves. So yeah, it's amazing.
Awesome.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Stacey. And you'll be coming back for another episode. So everybody look forward to another Stacey episode coming soon. Have a great day, Stacey.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, as usual, I could have kept Stacey on longer. I had so many more questions. And in fact, at the end, I asked her, what happens if two parts arise, two or more, I guess, parts, I had said two, but two or more parts arise, and they both feel like they are the best part to take care of you in that particular moment. And so now the parts are fighting. And she was like, oh, that's absolutely a thing that happens. And then she said, did you watch Inside Out 2, which I referenced in the beginning of this episode. So My mindful moment for you this week is a really fun one. It's watch the movie Inside Out 2. Watch it by yourself, watch it with your kids, watch it with your partner, and have this conversation in the back of your mind and view the movie through the lens of this conversation and through the lens of your own experience and see if you can see your own parts and where they're showing up and how they're showing up. And sometimes just that awareness, right? All change begins with awareness. We say that all the time on this show. Maybe you can start to recognize when your parts are showing up in your life, and then have that conversation with your part, like Stacey mentioned. Have that conversation as to whether they are needed in that moment, or whether they need to go take a seat on the lazy chair, like Stacey said. So I hope that's a fun, mindful moment for you this week. I have actually not seen the movie. I've been wanting to see it forever, and I'm trying to get the family all together to watch it. And at this stage of my family's life, getting us all together in the same room for an extended period of time it requires a lot of planning. So we're going to do it over Christmas break. Because I'm recording this the week before Christmas, we're going to do it over Christmas break. And I too will be watching this movie and reflecting on my own parts that show up in my life and this conversation with Stacey. So we'll be doing it together. All right, guys, have a wonderful week. I will talk to you next time. Hi, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, I ask that you please like the show, follow, subscribe, or share. The way that podcasts work is the more people that do one of those things, the more likely it is that when someone's looking for a podcast to listen to, our show will pop up for them. I started this podcast because I really see there's a great need in our world for people to feel more peace, joy, love, and acceptance in their lives. And I think we can do that when we have a greater sense of self-awareness. We can become conscious creators of our own lives. And I'm seeking to do that for as many people as possible. So if you could help me by liking, sharing, or subscribing to the show, I'd really appreciate it. And hopefully someone hears a conversation that changes their life. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time. Much love.